As a small girl and her mother enjoyed their happy existence in a peaceful town, everything changed when a horrible event happened that day, ruining the kid's innocence and changing the course of her life irrevocably. An innocent child faces unfathomable tragedy as she embarks on a perilous quest to discover the truth. Listen to this tragic tale with us, and please share your location with us. A lively little girl named Lila, who was 5 years old, loved spending time with her mom, Claire. Their little existence was brimming with affection. By making her favorite foods, assisting with her schoolwork, and reading her bedtime tales night after night, Claire went above and beyond to make Lila feel special. They would relish in leisurely strolls on bright days, gathering leaves and taking in the beauty of nature. They had an unshakable relationship, and Claire was Lila's whole universe. They created a sanctuary of comfort and inspiration in the living room by spending nights there, reading or sketching together. Tragic events occurred in their lives on a seemingly ordinary day. The day began normally enough, with Lila making her way to school, as always, eager to catch up with her friends and tell them about her exciting weekend. At the door, Claire kissed her farewell and gave her her favorite sandwich, saying that she would pick her up later. Without realizing it, Lila bounced down the walk, soaking in her mother's beautiful smile for the last time. Lila was summoned to the office by the principal of Lila's school in the late afternoon. Her dad, David, was waiting patiently. With his hands buried in his pockets, he remained still beside the window, gazing out into space. He glanced across at Lila as she walked in, his face contorted with tension. "Lila," he said, his voice quivering with grief. "Your mom was in an accident. She's gone from this world." Things fell apart for Lila. With a quiver in her voice, she said, "What? What do you mean?" David looked away as he said the words she hated. "She is gone, Lila. We are powerless in this situation." He didn't even bother to hug or provide solace. By nightfall, the once charismatic home seemed deathly frigid and deserted. While sitting on her bed and mentally reliving the words, Lila clutched the teddy bear that her mother had given her. "Gone," she murmured to herself, her mind reeling from the unbelievable. The air was thick with heaviness, and the wall shadows seemed deeper. The world continued on outside Lila's window as if nothing had happened. But her world had come to an end. With the exception of the rare creak of the floors, the home was completely silent. The world had become too large for her, and she felt little and confused. Sitting on the sofa, Lila clutched a pillow as the house fell into a hushed stillness. David stepped in for a second and glanced across at her. "You better be tough." After saying, "Things have changed and we have to move forward," he went back to his room. David became even more distant in the days that came after. Even when Lila tried to get him to talk about Claire, he avoided the subject. David brushed off Lila's recollections of her mother, such as the Saturday pancake ritual when she brought them up. "That won't win her back," he said with an air of coldness. Under the shadow of David's rigidity, the tenderness of Claire's love faded into oblivion. Darkness was the worst part. Lila cried herself to sleep, unable to stop looking at the ceiling, since Claire had stopped telling her tales. As a subtle but poignant reminder of what had been lost, her mother's scent hung in the air. Lila used to sit by the window during peaceful periods, tracing the rain with her fingertips and daydreaming about her mother's soothing voice. Weeks passed, and each day seemed heavier than the one before it. Marie, Lila's granny, paid a visit after Claire's death. The sight of Lila's frail figure and expressionless face crushed her. Mary no longer knew the lively home she had known. It was difficult to look beyond the palpable sense of emptiness in the air, and the formerly vibrant artwork on the walls seemed lifeless. David's apathy came through as he avoided Mary and went back to his room while she spent time with Lila. "How are you, sweetheart?" Mary sat down next to her and inquired. "I'm fine, Grandma," Lila said with a lack of passion in her voice. Mary felt the neglect as she spotted Lila's icy fingertips. Mary started dropping by more regularly, intent on lending a hand. A resentful David eventually emerged, accusing her of meddling. Mary saw Lila eating a bread sandwich on the kitchen floor one night. "What gives you the need to consume this?" She inquired if your dad hadn't prepared supper for you. "He said he didn't have time," was Lila's tearful reaction, and that prompted Mary to think about pursuing custody. The indications of neglect were too obvious for her to ignore, even if her funds were tight. She couldn't shake the expression in Lila's eyes. Realizing she would want evidence of the negligence, Mary began recording her observations. She documented Lila's anecdotes and snapped pictures of the empty refrigerator. The more she went, the more determined she became. The discovery of Mary's custody application infuriated David. "Do you really believe you can separate my daughter from me?" he said, confronting her at her residence. Despite the pressure, Mary remained composed. "Lila needs love and care, David, and you're not giving her that." A strategic plan sprang from his fury. He started acting the part of a doting father by lavishing Lila with presents and attention. He proposed going shopping one night. Skeptical Lila reluctantly nodded. Something was still wrong, even with all the attention she was receiving. At the same time, David cast doubt on Mary's character by saying she was too weak and elderly to be a good mother. Lila saw her anxiety intensify as a result of his attempts to control the situation. "Grandma can't do everything for you," he said one night. Lila listened in silence, her perplexity weighing heavily on her heart. His unexpected generosity left her feeling betrayed, despite her desire to trust him. Even though there were plenty of new toys, the home still didn't seem warm or welcoming. Lila happened to overhear David and his buddy talking one night. "This must seem authentic for me. I am done if Mary is granted custody," he said. Lila felt a shiver go down her spine with every word he said, which had an air of both desperation and cunning. He went into detail about his scheme to produce evidence that would cast Mary in the role of an unsuitable guardian. "She's elderly and fragile," he said, his tone betraying his intense disdain. "It'll be easy to convince the court she can't handle raising a child." Then Lila was shattered to her core. Disregarding the emotional burden of Claire's loss, David talked about the life insurance money. "That money is the real prize," he said. "That's more than enough to put me at ease. My intention is to act as if I am doing everything for Lila's benefit, but we are both aware that this is not true." Then, to Lila's dismay, came a hollow chuckle. Lila returned to her room in a state of terror and despair. As her frail body quivered, each stride seemed like an enormous ordeal. Upon entering her bedroom, she knelt on her bed and embraced her knees. Her mind replayed the statements she had overheard, and with each one, her trust was sliced like a sword. The father she had wished to have faith in was really using her for his own gain. Thinking back on the last several weeks, she was able to piece together what had really happened. The unexpected presents, the social engagements, and the fake smiles were all an act to control her. Whispering to herself, she said, "It was never real," as tears streamed down her face. Once a sanctuary, her little room now seemed like a prison. Fear not, because a determination was taking shape inside her. David couldn't succeed if she let him. Lila was determined to defend herself and her grandma, no matter how difficult it would be to go up against her father in court. She hardly slept that night. Her mother's memories and her own future depended on her finding the truth. So she started to devise a strategy while gazing at the ebb and flow of shadows on the ceiling. Lila sat next to Mary throughout the hearing, holding her hand firmly. The weight of the occasion was magnified by the towering courthouse with its high ceilings and massive doors. David and his lawyer presented their case with an air of self-assurance and impeccable attire. They articulated their feelings well, praising David as a kind father who had helped out when things were tough and casting doubt on Mary's capacity to care for Lila. The attorney sought to persuade the court that Mary's guardianship would not be in Lila's best interest by highlighting her advanced age and financial difficulties. With her back straight and a little trembling in her palms, Mary sat quietly. Her attorney made a strong and convincing argument when her time came. David had tried to get control of Claire's life insurance money, and they set forth proof of his financial trickery. Evidence of David's carelessness and self-interest was shown by the documents that showed the contradictions between his statements and his behavior. Lila was then given the opportunity to speak. As the little girl cautiously made her way to the front, everyone in the room seemed to be holding their breath. She sat down on the bench and stared at the judge in disbelief. She said, "He doesn't care about me," and her voice was weak but strong enough to convey, "Money is all that matters to him." His words reached my ears. "Neither my mother nor I can hope that he loves us." All he wants is to have it his way. Her speech hushed the audience. David, whose self-assurance had been eroding, squirmed uneasily in his chair. As the child's statements were laden with indisputable truth, the judge's countenance softened as she studied Lila with great attention. Tears were flowing down Lila's cheeks as she proceeded, her hands firmly grasping the edge of the platform. I am looked after by my granny. She cares about me and makes sure I remember my mom by bringing up my mom. However, my dad never once mentions her by name. With a steady but authoritative voice, the judge leaned forward ever so slightly. I appreciate it, Lila. It took a lot of courage on your part. A short but crucial decision was announced shortly thereafter when the gavel fell. Mary was given interim custody, and Lila's accusations were ordered investigated by the court. Lila looked to Mary, who embraced her warmly as the chamber resounded with the gavel's sound. Lila sensed a little but increasing light in the darkness, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, she allowed herself to hope. For the first time in weeks, Lila felt secure returning to Mary's humble house. Mary poured her heart and her soul into making their lives comfortable, showering them with love and attention every day. By carrying on Claire's practice of reading Lila a bedtime tale, she helped Lila feel closer to her mother's memories. Some familiar and comforting object might be found in every corner of Mary's house. Mary listened to Lila's laughter and play in a park that Claire had adored. It had been much too long since she had heard such noise. A string of little successes began to define life. Lila regained her grin, met new friends, and reminisced about her mother. Together with Mary, they built a life that was simple but hopeful. They persevered through the difficulties because of the love and strength that was inside them. As they played board games or cooked together in Mary's house, evenings were full of laughter. Better times were ahead, and they could shape those better times however they liked. Do you have any thoughts about Lila's adventure? What kind of impression did her courage and resolve leave on you? Given the circumstances, would you have had the courage to stand up for Lila just as Mary did?